always monitoring threats to free speech, and one of them could be former Microsoft CEO and co-founder Bill Gates. Billionaire suggested an artificial intelligence program that would ban harmful speech.
We should have free speech, but if you're inciting violence, if you're causing people not to take vaccines, you know, where are those boundaries that even the U.S. Should, you know, have rules? And then if you have rules, you know, what is it? Is there some AI that encodes those rules because you have billions of activity and, you know, if you catch it a day later, the harm is done?
Gates published a 7-page paper on the future of AI last year, writing that developing artificial intelligence is, quote, as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, and the mobile phone. But he still has some reservations. On Monday, he voiced his concern, quote, that bad people with bad intent will use AI for cybercrime, bioterrorism, nation-state wars. He also said he was concerned about the rate of change that could leave people without jobs and is also worried about the loss of control, including AI being used as a vehicle to spread misinformation.
Speaking of misinformation, former United States Secretary of State John Kerry called the First Amendment a barrier to reaching the truth. Let's watch this.
If people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, you know, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, you know, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, you know, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
I find those comments utterly odious. The First Amendment does not stop you from correcting wrongful information. The First Amendment makes sure that no single government authority gets to determine what is correct information. They can't be trusted to do so because our government lies to us, not just on the health-related or COVID-related issues, but about national security. People in our government made catastrophically bad decisions leading up to the Iraq War and many other examples of this. If they get to decide what's true or false, they can't be trusted to do so. The framers of our Constitution, the people who invented the American system, in their wisdom, made sure that you would be able to contradict the government, and so we have this important protection, the First Amendment, that gets in the way of doing exactly what John Kerry just suggested.
You're correct on your thesis, right?
Yes.
100%. But what John Kerry is not clarifying is that places like Twitter are not the news. They're a private corporation. They are not handled democratically. They don't have editors and fact checkers. So the way that we treat the media, which is also deeply flawed, and most mainstream media is tied to corporate interests and or the national security state, and that is something that there are some protections for news companies, and there's also some restrictions. They have to have more balance. That does not work in the case of Twitter and Facebook and a lot of these platforms, and definitely not with AI. Now, do I like that, you know, Gates is going out there and inserting his opinion on policy? I don't love that, right?
I mean, speaking of corporate interests.
But he has the right as an individual to do so, and he is not saying, you know, that he's going to crack down. He is saying these are what I recommend for these reasons, and I agree with his reasons. But simultaneously, the pressure needs to be on lawmakers to take these tech companies into account. Like, they need to be held accountable for not having transparent algorithms, for having bot farms, for having, you know, not clamping down on foreign disinformation campaigns that are being pushed, for having an algorithm that skews, in the case of YouTube and some other platforms, very far right and male towards young male individuals. Like, when I open up YouTube, I see makeup tutorials. I don't know how to put makeup on. I work in politics. All I do is watch political shows on YouTube. But I, as a woman, do not have the same experience as most men under 40 do. So that is not a town square. That is not democracy. So if you're building a base of communication off of something that is already skewed in one direction, sure, you can say whatever you want, but I'm not going to get the same attention as, you know, Joe Rogan does on, well, first off, he has a much bigger contract, but it's just, it's not skewed in similar directions, and so that's my complaint.
It's not, but it's, you know, as you alluded to, it's not required to be because it is a private company. If they tried to, if it was forced on them to be skewed, you might argue more fairly or whatever, that is exactly what would violate the First Amendment. The First Amendment doesn't say Twitter or YouTube has to be this place of pure neutrality or has to operate one way. What the First Amendment says is that the government could not take action to force it to be that way. So that's
unless
just not
it's
gonna
issues
work.
of national security, and that
No, that's not an exception to the First Amendment. The exceptions are incitement to violence and libel and slander and those kinds of things, which, you know, it's fascinating. We didn't talk about this, how quickly Bill Gates goes from, you know, there's not pure free speech. Okay, we understand that. There are recognized by the Supreme Court exceptions to the First Amendment. Incitement to violence is one of them, although it's a very narrow category where it's actual incitement to violence. And then he says incitement to violence, encouraging people not to take a vaccine. That's not incitement to violence. That's not prohibited under the First Amendment. You could make an argument. You are free to do that. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, but that is not unprotected by the First Amendment
so what if
whatsoever.
He's not attacking, I can't speak on behalf of Bill Gates, but just playing devil's advocate here. What if he's not attacking a person's right to say it, but a campaign, a company that is pushing one narrative through I mean, a bot isn't an individual. That's not a real person with rights to free speech or not. A Russian operation definitely doesn't have the same rights as an American citizen does. So at what point, I mean, corporations are people, but are bots people?
Well, I would say the right is not just on the speaker, right? The right is not in fact, the First Amendment is not a permission for the speaker. It's an infringement on the government for speech. Mm-hmm. And there's a speaker and there's a listener. So you say bots maybe don't have rights, but I, as the person consuming this content, engaging with and listening to this speech, I have a right to hear it if I want to. The government is restricted from doing anything to stop me from hearing that if I want to. It's not really a right for the speaker. It's an infringement on the government to prevent me from hearing the speech. So, you know, again, Russian disinformation, propaganda, whatever it is, I say that stuff's all bad. It's bad speech. It's not good. It's bad policy. Russia is bad. But I have a right to engage with it as I want. In fact, I might want to talk about it. I might want to know what they're saying so I can correct it, so I can explain why I think it's wrong. I would still say, even for obvious propaganda from foreign governments, that we have the right to consume that. And you know what? Sometimes there's a kernel of truth to it.
Oftentimes they're weaponizing. I mean, they're weaponizing, and that's really what John Kerry is trying to say, is they're weaponizing free speech. We have laws in this country that make America great. But also sometimes those laws and those truths.
I mean, free speech is a weapon.
It is a weapon, and for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
we're throwing bombs at each other, not quote
right
rhetorical bombs.
Yeah.
But with that being said, is the system so if the government can say to a broadcaster, you have to purchase a broadcasting license in order to be seen on the airwaves, and to be on the airwaves, you have to show different sides. You can't just be one way, one-sided, and you have to perform, basic workplace. You have to have equal opportunity employer, because that's the way that we employ people in this country. That is a systemic issue that actually shapes the way that we hear the news, what information is being shared. So if Twitter does not operate the same way because they're not broadcasting and they're not press, they can get away with whatever they want. So you're seeing mostly one-sided narratives.
Well, I would say, first of all, some of those policies have gone out of existence and would not stand up to Supreme Court scrutiny now in terms of the, neutrality of the airwaves, that kind of, I'm forgetting what the name of the policy is right now, but the one that required some kind of balance on the airwaves. Now, licensing specifically for airwaves has to do with what I'm not an expert in this category of the law or even this technology, but like there's only one person can use this, or one company can use this airwave, this bandwidth at a time, so there had to be some licensing of it, given that it's restrictive. If you're using this frequency, someone else can't use it. That doesn't apply to social media. So I think there's not a practical justification for having some licensing scheme there. I mean, the licensing scheme was never about the content necessarily. It was about using if you're talking about the cable company or the actual phone lines, there's an infrastructure that is finite, that you're right, is regulated in some way. It's gotten less regulated over time.
And you have to have a lot of money to do it.
None of that applies to social media because it's non-rivalrous. It doesn't exclude anyone else. Twitter existing is not taking up space in the physical universe that is stopping some other expressive platform from existing. It's just market competition. If people like one more than the other, they're going to use one more than the other. So it lends itself, I think, to an even more pure First Amendment kind of ethos where there is not a way for the government to intrude. And then, of course, there's just the law is slightly different. The law for internet companies, Section 230, is an extremely broad protection of the platform, of the owners of the company, to have whatever speech policies they want. And people on the right sometimes don't like them, people on the left sometimes don't like them, people in the middle sometimes don't like them. But the law says that's your problem because they can set whatever policies they want and they are not liable for what happens in terms of the speech on the platform. And I actually think that's good, because if that was changed, they would have tremendous incentive to do much more aggressive moderation, and I don't want that.
I just wish that Elon Musk in particular, Mr. Free Speech Absolutist,
Mr. Free Speech himself,
would follow his own values. And if he is a free speech absolutist, why doesn't he become a media company? And why doesn't he operate like...
What is a media company?
It isn't, though. It's a tech company, and
it's a conservative media company.
But
Let's
it's
be
not
honest,
a
that's what it
newspaper. It's definitely conservative. Well, it's a conspiratorial media company.
I wouldn't say that. I would say it's a conservative media company, but one where, okay, but like if we think of CNN as a liberal media company,
I don't see CNN as a liberal.
Well, you should. I think of CNN as a liberal media company with very little dissent from a liberal bottom line present within the company. Twitter is a conservative media company where there is tons of dissent, because you can find dissenting content. You can find content from other media organizations on the platform. Is it skewing right-wing increasingly since Elon took it over? Yes, I do think so. But it's still more balanced than just about any other media company you can come across.
I don't agree. I mean, we're not really dealing with the best batch of folks to defend. There's really nobody to defend right now, social media-wise. I mean, Blue Sky's not it right now. Threads is just my Instagram feed on a Twitter that doesn't make any sense. Like, I follow cooks and yoga teachers on Instagram, and now suddenly I'm reading their political beliefs and going, that's a little interesting.
Oh, Threads, yeah, that was never going to work.
And it's not in real time. Like, what?
Yeah,
just complain about all of them right now.
Yeah, that was a bad idea, that we would be interested in hearing more political views from the kinds of people you follow on Instagram. No, you follow people on Instagram because they're your friends or your family, and that we would be interested in hearing more political views from the kinds of people you follow on Instagram. No, you follow people on Instagram because they're your friends or your family, and you want to see the nice photos they pick, or you follow celebrities because of fashion trends or entertainment or whatever. I don't want to hear more about what they have to actually say about things.
And it's not real time, too, which is the utility of Twitter when it was at its best was this place to go when there was a breaking story or a live event or something happening in your community where you could go like hashtag, Capitol Hill, D.C. Okay, there's always stuff in Capitol Hill, but picking your little neighborhood. And, it democratized our experience with celebrities and with reporters that, you get in a fight with a New York Times reporter, and it was really fun, and you really could expand their, beyond their column and go into more conversation with them. And it's just not that space now. It's this outrage machine. There's a lot of bullying and targeting, and people don't even realize they're being played. This psychological torture game that's occurring on Twitter. And Elon
I don't know if it's as bad as all that.
I don't. Well, you're not a woman on Twitter. I could tweet out "I like donuts" right now, and let me tell you the hate that I would get for that.
I mean, I get some hate.
Not as much.
I don't know.
We should play a game. Bobby and Nomi tweet the same exact thing, and
then
people respond.
I'm not gonna, because I just don't do this in general, because I'm not a woe is me type person. We're in the media. I can take it. It's fine. But in the past with my other co-hosts, if a clip from the show has been somehow taken, usually not from our own purposes, but by a high-profile account who happens to disagree with me, gets posted on. Usually it's elsewhere, like on Instagram or something. I've gotten some hate in the past. It does happen, but I take your point or your word for it that I'm sure you faced worse, and that's not good. And everyone should send less vile, awful, hateful, threatening messages to people. It's not cool.
Take a breath, guys. Go outside, get some fresh air, touch the grass. Remember, you're human.
Human after all. More Rising right after this.